Fox News Primetime with Ben Domenech starts right now. Hey, Ben.
Thank you, Brett. Good evening and welcome to Fox News Primetime. For the past half century, the United States of America has dominated a category no one would ever want to own. We have, as a nation, one of the most radical abortion regimes in the world. It might surprise you to know this. You certainly won't hear it from anyone on any other network. But that supposedly extreme Mississippi law headed for the Supreme Court, which would block most abortions after 15 weeks, would be right at home in Europe, when all those nations the left wants to emulate in other areas of policy, like France and Sweden, ban abortion. In fact, all the countries you see on your screen ban elective abortion at 12 weeks. None of them have what America effectively has in many states, abortion up to the point of birth. For that, you have to look at our moral equals in nations like China or North Korea. Why is it that America has persisted in this extreme regime, even as the rest of the world woke up to the moral reality of what abortion does to families and societies? It's a complicated story, but it's also very simple, really. Many of us have been willing to look the other way, and a vast industry of powerful forces in our country have worked very hard to make sure that we do. Understand, there is no more important single issue today to the left than the issue of abortion. It is an item of faith they are wedded to stronger than any religious conviction. If you've ever been taken aback by the vitriol, violence, and false accusations leveled against any who challenge abortion, you'll know what I'm talking about. The kind that makes a young woman spit on an elderly priest. It's safer to attempt sacrilege in a cathedral than abortion rallies. To criticize the abortion regime is to place yourself at odds not just with the most powerful activist groups and donors. It is to take on the woke corporatists and Hollywood and our corrupt media and big tech and, well, just about everybody with power in America today. Since the moment Roe versus Wade short-circuited the legal conversation about abortion, the pro-abortion left has worked to gaslight the country into believing things that just aren't true. They pretended they wanted abortions to be rare. They claimed they didn't profit from them. They denied they sold organs. They refused to acknowledge the science of what we know about the development of unborn babies, utterly unknown to the authors of Roe, by the way. And they ignored the terrible and tragic impact on America's poorest and most vulnerable families, and on the black community in particular. More black babies are aborted than born in New York City every year, and that's fine with them. They also did everything they could to build up men like Bill Clinton and Andrew Cuomo, because the abortion agenda is always more important. Why do you think Joe Biden flipped on the Hyde Amendment and taxpayer-funded abortions after an entire career of saying he believed the opposite? Every Sunday, his head bowed in his church. He knows who runs the left. He wanted to be president, and he was willing to make a deal to do it. And in every aspect of this effort, the pro-abortion left has had the strong advocacy of a media that has displayed more corruption on this topic than perhaps any other. If you watch ABC, NBC, or CBS today, pro-life women simply do not exist. The media's coverage of this issue is indistinguishable from Planned Parenthood press releases, and the journalists who cover it are universally not just pro-choice, but obviously pro-abortion. But now, at long last, something is happening. The energy in the pro-life movement is like nothing we've seen before. Abortion is no longer accepted as an unobjectionable good. The Shout Your Abortion movement, where women are encouraged by the abortion lobby to boast about killing their children, comes across as desperate and sad. Decades of ultrasound pictures on refrigerators and women brave enough to talk about miscarriage and loss have a way of changing minds. When Iceland says they've eradicated Down syndrome, good people cringe because we know what that really means.
I am a man. See me as a human being, not a birth defect, not a syndrome. I don't need to be eradicated. I don't need to be cured.
And when naive leftists regularly suggest that pro-lifers like children so much, maybe we should force the dads to pay child support for unborn babies, our response is, your terms are acceptable. There is today renewed hope among those who believe every unborn baby has a right to life, that the Supreme Court may at long last reopen this significant question for us to decide as citizens and states, instead of leaving the deepest moral question of life and death to 9 people in robes. Tonight I'm going to be talking to a number of heroic pro-life women who brought us to this moment. Their determined work in law and politics and culture is absolutely the reason we are at this point so many of us despaired and once thought impossible. They've taken on the Goliath of the abortion industry and all its vile works with fearless dedication to be a voice for the voiceless. Much of the discussion around abortion is about the law. And of course, we'll talk about that tonight. But there's another law I want you to consider as you listen, and that is the law written on your hearts. Back in 1933, long before Roe, Whittaker Chambers was working as a Soviet agent when his wife found out she was pregnant. Despite the initial joy, they both knew that as communist agents, such things were not possible. His wife went to see a doctor to make arrangements. When she came back, she was quiet and non-committal. And it slowly dawned on Chambers she wanted to keep the child. He asked her. As he writes in his autobiography, Witness, "My wife came over to me, took my hands, and burst into tears. 'Dear heart,' she said in a pleading voice, 'we couldn't do that awful thing to a little baby. Not to a little baby, dear heart.' A wild joy swept me. Reason, the agony of my family, the Communist Party and its theories, the wars and revolutions of the 20th century crumbled at the touch of the child. What we are discussing tonight is the most fundamental question for us. Whether the unborn lives that take root here in America are unique persons with the right to draw breath and blossom, or whether they are non-persons, lives unworthy of life, human weeds, as Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger called them, whose destruction is a public good. The Mishnah tells us that to destroy a life is to destroy a whole world, the worlds that would have been with that life in it. Look to the law written on your heart. You know this to be true. I'm Ben Domenech, and this is the American Crisis. Here with me tonight is Carrie Severino from the Judicial Crisis Network. Carrie, thanks so much for taking the time to join me this evening. I want to ask you right off the bat to give us perspective on what's going on when it comes to the law before the courts. We've heard the left's side of this perspective in all major media over the past several months. What's the truth about what is going on?
Yeah, well, so the Supreme Court has before it this term probably the most consequential case in the abortion arena that it's considered, at least for 30 years, when they considered Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1991. The Mississippi case you alluded to before is really challenging Roe versus Wade head on, because under the Roe and Casey framework, no limitation of abortion, no elimination of abortion after it is allowed until after viability. And it's very clear that 15 weeks, well, as you said, relatively late in pregnancy, it's already into the second trimester, it's later than most European countries would prohibit abortion, is clearly violating Roe. And so the justices have a real decision in front of them. They have to either choose to follow a precedent that even most pro-choice commentators at the time acknowledged that this is actually not very good law. It's not based in the Constitution. It's not. It doesn't follow a legal procedure to get to where it does. Or they have a choice to look at what the Constitution actually says about abortion, which is precisely nothing. It does not have a right to abortion written in it. So for originalists, like the majority of the court is, you have to decide if you're going to follow the original understanding of the Constitution. There's kind of an open and shut question. There's no other direction you go. So it's going to be exciting in December to see, as the court grapples with this question in oral arguments, which direction it looks like it will go.
There are certainly a number of people who over the years have made the argument that the way to approach this problem was to go through the courts. And conservatives, pro-life conservatives, have, for the most part, gone along with that. There are a lot of expectations, though, now built in. And this could go either way. It could go in a lot of different directions. What are you saying to those who are, I'm sure, asking you every day on a daily basis, what can we expect? How do you think things are going to go? And what are the tea leaves, if any, that you can read from this current makeup of the court about the potential there?
Well, look, I am very happy that this case is coming before the Supreme Court when we have a solid majority of originalists in the court now than how it would have looked, even 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It would have been a very different picture. So I think we have more cause for optimism now than any other time. But, I'm not sure this is not an issue that really should be decided in the courts. And that's the real question here is, should courts be the one making this decision? The Constitution has certain things that it protects, and the courts are there to defend those, but they're not there to import into the Constitution their own beliefs about what's important in America. That's the job of our legislatures, is to say, beyond what our constitutional baseline is, what do we want our laws to look like? And that's something that might change over time. That's something that's going to look different in each of the different 50 states, but that's not something that the Constitution dictates in this case. It's not something the court should be doing. So I think the way to address this issue is to get the courts out of it. It would take down the temperature on the politics of our Supreme Court nominations, and it would put it back where it belongs constitutionally, to the American people. That's not a full-out win for the pro-life movement either. You're going to have a range of options, everything from Texas and Georgia on one hand to New York and California allowing abortion basically up until the moment of birth. So you're going to see a range, and then the pro-life movement has its work cut out for it to try to change the culture as they've been working on for the last 50 years.
You mentioned the temperature around judicial nominations. The temperature around the potential oral arguments here and everything else that comes after that is obviously going to be extremely heated. In terms of that shifting anything in the reaction of the justices, they're human beings too. Are you at all concerned that the kind of threats, the kind of potential outrage over this is going to lead the court into trying to find some different direction, trying to find some half measure in order to avoid that conflagration?
Yeah, and we know this court always would rather decide things on a narrower grounds if they could. The challenge is, in this case, they really have a choice of either following what the Constitution says and saying there's no right to abortion there, let's let the states decide, or they're going to have to just basically make up a new standard that's not in the Constitution or anywhere else. And that's not an option I would hope that the originalists in the court would be comfortable making. That said, you're right, there's an incredible amount of intimidation, threats being leveled against the court. Remember the last time the court considered an abortion case, the June medical case, a couple years ago, we had Senator Chuck Schumer on the steps of the court waving his fist at the justices saying, you're not going to know what's going to hit you, calling them out by name. I mean, that's really outrageous. We're having people threatening to pack the court. The justices are sensitive to that. They realize that would be destroying the court as an institution. And I think even the very Democratic senators and members of the House threatening it realize it would, but they're just willing to play that kind of hardball because they're so bent on controlling the outcome and not allowing the court to make an independent decision based on the law. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me tonight, Carrie. Thanks, Ben. Joining me now is Tennessee Senator Marcia Blackburn. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me tonight, Senator. I know that you are someone who's very familiar with the battle that's played out in recent years over abortion politics. You've been a key member of the Senate during multiple judicial classes. Why are you and so many other pro-life women feeling optimistic in this moment about the potential for a really life-changing and generation-altering reaction by the court to some of the cases that we see moving forward?
Yeah, Ben, thank you so much. You know, one of the things that we are seeing this time around is that science is on our side. And of course, the Mississippi case is the biggest case that has gone to the Supreme Court in 30 years. And what it would do is move forward that date, looking at viability, challenging that constitutional right. I think that Mississippi is well prepared for this case, and science is on our side. When you look at when a baby can feel pain, when you approach, when you can hear the heartbeat of an unborn child. So yes, indeed, we are optimistic.
You know, I know that this is going to be a challenge in terms of arguing this case and proceeding forward, and I know that you're friends with the Attorney General of Mississippi. Tell us a little bit about the approach that they're taking.
Yes, I think that they have done this well. They've handled it all in-house, and Mississippi's Attorney General Lynn Fitch is very well schooled in this. In her challenge to the court, she asked for a revisit of that constitutional right to an abortion, which of course leads you to Roe v. Wade. The other thing that I think provides so many Americans optimism on this is that there have been 76 amicus briefs filed in favor of the Mississippi lawsuit. And then also the other thing is that when you look at polling writ large, only 29% of the American people favor abortion after you get past that first trimester. So this is something that, as I said, science is on our side, public opinion is on our side, and it is leading people to rethink this.
One of the things that's been so astonishing that's played out in America over the last couple of decades is the total cultural shift on this issue into a monopartisan affair. It seems like every pro-life Democrat or Democrat who had any kind of moderation on this issue has been driven out of the party. And we saw just this week the Hyde Amendment being a major issue and part of the negotiations over infrastructure and reconciliation and the like. Do you think that we've really had a situation here where one party has become increasingly extreme because of the loud voices on the pro-abortion left?
I think you're precisely correct on that. I have so many friends who are now grandmothers, and they talk about how they once were in favor of abortion, but now, because of seeing those ultrasounds, hearing those heartbeats, they're beginning to say, no, we can't do that. And when you look at the shift that has taken place, you have seen people that were moderate Democrats who now classify themselves as independents because they are no longer pro-abortion. And they feel like there should be restrictions that would bring the U.S. in line with other nations when it comes to limiting the availability of abortion.
You know, Senator, this is one of those issues where it's taken a lot of women a lot of time in terms of their efforts in politics to stand up on this issue, to push forward in the courts, and to make their voices heard. The media likes to pretend that pro-life women don't exist, but you're one of the examples that has been critical to this fight. Thank you, Senator. Coming up, Democrats can't seem to agree on anything. Why an abortion debate may be the latest item to grind Joe Biden's radical agenda to a screeching halt. Liz Wheeler and Rachel Campos Duffy are next. Democrats can't get their act together when it comes to Biden's radical spending bill. They're at odds with the numbers, the pet pot projects, and now they're arguing over the inclusion of the Hyde Amendment. This provision bans federal funding for elective abortions, and Democrat Senator Joe Manchin wants it included in the bill. But far-left members of his own party want it gone for good. Joining me now to react, Fox and Friends Weekend co-host Rachel Campos Duffy and Liz Wheeler, host of The Liz Wheeler Show. Liz, the Hyde Amendment used to be something that was just an agreed-upon thing. It had bipartisan support. It was included whenever you were sending these things out. And Democrats would run on saying, well, I'm personally, have certain views on abortion, but I don't think we should use your money to fund it. What changed?
Well, the radical left, AOC, the Squad, came in and changed the Democratic Party, as you know. I mean, the Hyde Amendment, as you mentioned, the Hyde Amendment used to be a nonpartisan, bipartisan thing when it was introduced by Henry Hyde. I think there were 100 Democrats who supported it at that time. And listen, this is something that represents the majority of the country. The Hyde Amendment has estimated to have saved 2.5 million unborn children from abortion. Those precious babies have been saved. This is not something that is a Democratic issue versus a Republican issue when you ask the voters. It's only that partisan in Washington, D.C. There's a new poll that says that 58% of the American people do not want taxpayer money used to pay for abortions. Only 38% of Americans want that. That's a huge divide, Ben, a huge divide. And that divide actually accurately reflects the popular opinion on abortion itself. The vast majority of the American people want restrictions on abortion. 80% of of people, both pro-abortion and pro-life, think abortion should be illegal in the 3rd trimester. 60% of people think abortion should be illegal in the 2nd trimester because abortion is a brutal, gruesome procedure that not only ends the life of an unborn child, but harms women too. The Democrats are ignoring their constituents in the interest of their own political agenda.
You know, Rachel, you are familiar, of course, I'm sure, with many pro-life Democrats from union households, Catholic households across the country, who nonetheless have voted for Democrats over the years, and yet they've done so during this great cultural sort, where all of the pro-life Democrats that we used to be familiar with have been pushed out of the party, that they don't have a place to go anymore. It's astounding, the numbers that Liz quoted are accurate, how much that doesn't represent their own constituency.
Yeah, I mean, the Biden administration is the most radical pro-abortion administration in U.S. history, and they are totally out of step. Joe Manchin is actually doing a favor to the party by trying to bring them a little bit in step. But our country is divided, and our country is divided on this moral issue for the same reason our country was divided over slavery. Anytime that you have people who are powerful, who want to profit out of deciding who is sufficiently human enough to live. You know, you can do anything you want to somebody once you decide they're not sufficiently human. We had this cultural debate in the 1800s. We're having it now, and thanks to technology, as Senator Blackburn talked about, the pro-abortion side is losing because millions of women and frankly their children, their children who are alive are meeting their siblings in utero because those images are so clear, they're so profound, they cannot be argued with. And the radical abortionists on the other side, the pro-abortionists, they look so delusional, they look so antiquated as they cling to these, 1970 notions of fetal development. I mean, you just cannot. I can tell you, Ben, the ultrasound that I saw with my oldest, Evita, down to the ultrasound I saw with my youngest, who is 2 years old, it's just night and day. I mean, I could see musculature, I could see, fingernails so clearly. Her little cheeks look exactly the same now as they did in utero with my last baby. Technology is on our side, and we're winning this debate not for religious reasons. As you know, Ben, our country is not becoming more religious, it's becoming more secular. But technology is actually bolstering this argument for pro-lifers, and we're winning on that.
Liz, real quick, you have seen this happen within your own generation. You've seen the shifts that have happened there, despite the dominant heights of Hollywood and the like being owned by the pro-abortion side. Why do you think that resistance has happened?
Yeah, I think Rachel's absolutely correct. I mean, we're the refrigerator door generation, right? We grew up seeing the ultrasound pictures of our brothers and sisters on the refrigerator door. I mean, I know how I felt at 6 weeks, when I was 6 weeks pregnant with my daughter, hearing that heartbeat. I mean, it's life-changing. You know that that's a human being inside. But I think it's also because we've started talking about the reality of what abortion is, what the procedure actually does, whether it's a first trimester abortion that poisons a baby, whether it's a second or third trimester abortion that rips a baby apart limb from limb, poisons, a lethal injection to the heart to stop that baby's heartbeat. When people realize the gruesome reality of what abortion is, they can't help but recognize that it's an atrocity to be committing against fellow human beings, even if they're in the womb.
Liz and Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to join me this evening.
Thanks for covering this
topic, Ben. I appreciate it.
Coming up next, big tech's attempt to silence conservatives. Why Google is saying thanks but no thanks to a pro-life group's online ad buy. Last year, Google made over $145 billion in ad revenue, but if you're pro-life, they don't want your money. Live Action is a pro-life organization whose ads were censored by Google on the grounds they made unproven medical claims. Lila Rose is the founder of Live Action, the pro-life organization whose ads were censored, and the author of Fighting for Life. And Catherine Glenn Foster is the CEO and president of Americans United for Life. Thank you both for joining me. Lila, first to you. I understand that, this ad is one aspect of this, but isn't this part of a whole approach by big tech behemoths to basically clamp down on anything that runs afoul of the pro-abortion agenda?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Ben. This isn't the first time Live Action or other pro-life groups have been censored. We're banned from advertising on Twitter, for example. Planned Parenthood and abortionists are advertising on Twitter. We're banned from Pinterest right now. Abortionists are advertising on Pinterest. And now Google. I mean, this is absolutely unprecedented what Google has chosen to do. They have removed all ads that promote the life-saving hormone progesterone, which is FDA approved, that can help counteract the abortion pill and actually save lives. It saved 2,500 babies already from being killed by the abortion pill when their mothers chose to get this treatment. And now we cannot, on behalf of pro-life doctors, help promote the hotline that would connect women to the life-saving care that makes it possible to reverse the abortion pill in some cases. And instead, Google is allowing abortionists, again, to advertise. So the bias, the pro-abortion ideological bias, is insane in big tech right now, and it should concern everyone, regardless of your position on abortion, because if you really care about choice, you would want women to have the choice for life, which is what we're trying to provide.
Catherine, I know that you've been making these arguments for a long time, and that you're very familiar with the forces that are arrayed against you. Are you surprised at the willingness of so many people on this issue to continue the fight despite the fact that there is this pro-abortion behemoth, all these different giants, Hollywood, not just the leftist activists, but everyone that they are able to bring along in their cause, their donor base, etc., that is arrayed against them?
We have monopoly corporations who are dominating American values and are trying to enforce their values and their corporate culture on everyday Americans and try to supplant the values of everyday Americans. It's not at all surprising that they are continuing to try to do this, even as we see polling, as we see Americans asking, begging for more information and for the truth about abortion law, about all of these social issues that impact our everyday lives. But they are continuing to do this, and it's not only happening at the upper level, at the policy level of these big corporations, your Google, your Salesforce, your Facebook, your Twitter, big tech, but it's also happening with sometimes these rogue employees who are able to go in and deplatform or in other ways impact the information, the media that we're getting into our homes.
I think you're both, I'm sure, familiar with the work of David Daleiden and the way that his reporting was met with just every attempt to try to silence and downgrade it. Lila, tell me what, in terms of the pushback that pro-lifers can do from their own work, from their own social media accounts, to the degree that they can within their communities. What is the approach that you recommend to people to take in this time as we're waiting to see what the court will ultimately do?
Well, the good news is the truth and just the beauty of life is on our side. And, you know, the pro-life movement is fighting for mothers and their children, families and their children. So the work that one person can do in sharing facts through social media and getting involved with their local pregnancy resource center. I mean, Live Action, we have over 5 million people connected with us sharing this content, and it's changing hearts every day. So keep sharing it, keep speaking out. Your message does make a difference. People's hearts and minds do change on abortion when they get the facts, when they get the information about fetal development, about the violence of abortion. So despite big media, big tech, you know, the political forces arrayed against the pro-life movement, the movement's growing. And, you know, Texas's heartbeat bill, more Americans supported it, according to the polling, than opposed it. You wouldn't have believed that looking at the news headlines, but more Americans support these laws than oppose them. Keep speaking out, and we're going to keep growing the movement.
Catherine, I know that at AUL you do a lot of work at the state level. Do you see the willingness on the part of increased numbers of state representatives and senators and people in positions there to continue this fight and to push back against this dominant regime?
State representatives are answering to the American people, are answering to their constituents, and they are passing more and more pro-life laws than ever before. In fact, to the point where the Guttmacher Institute, which is a pro-abortion research group, they called 2021 the most devastating anti-abortion state legislative year ever, which means that what we are doing is winning the battles in those state houses, in the hearts and the minds of the American public. We are passing more pro-life laws that are going to protect women, mothers, and children in the womb once they're born than we have ever passed before. And it is just truly an exciting time as the conversation on abortion continues to grow and build, as the truth on abortion continues to come out, even despite the censorship of big tech. We know what they're up to. We see through it, and we're going to continue to push them on that. We're going to continue to seek out the truth and the real information on our own. And as we are continuing to see everyday Americans do exactly what Lila just shared, reach out, work with your pregnancy center, maybe even testify at the State House, go sidewalk counsel, all of the different ways that we can, in our own small way, impact the process and impact the lives of women and children all around us who are going to continue to build our communities.
Catherine and Lila, thanks so much for joining me this evening.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Pleasure.
Black lives don't matter to Planned Parenthood. Find out why after the break. The pro-abortion left's hypocrisy on medical freedom has been on full display this week as the White House championed vaccine mandates in one moment, then loudly proclaimed "my body, my choice" in the next. And the demographic perhaps most affected by this hypocrisy is the black community, which makes up the largest percentage of abortions in the country. Joining me now are Gloria Purvis of the Gloria Purvis podcast and Christina Bennett, spokesperson for the pro-life group Live Action. Thank you both for joining me this evening. Gloria, first to you. I know that you're someone who's very familiar with the way that this issue has played out in ways that target some of the communities who are most vulnerable to the arguments being made that you can't have a baby right now, you can't afford to take care of it, that trying to take that shortcut as a way out. What is your response to that argument when you hear it? And what do you say when you go into these communities to try to convince people who are considering abortion otherwise?
First of all, killing the poor is not a solution to poverty, number one. And I hear so many arguments made for why black women need access to abortion so that they can rise up out of poverty. And that's just a lie. And I go into the community and we know, look, the black community is not some abortion-loving community, no matter how much the abortion industry tries to put a black face on their advertisements. We cherish our families. We want to have living wages to be able to support our families. And what these women need, and men, is encouragement and support. And I go in and offer that in the community. And oftentimes that's just what people need to hear, is that you can do this. And we're here to support you with that through the birth and even after, with any kind of material support and friendship that you would need. But again, killing the poor is not a solution to poverty.
Christina, I know it's a similar question to you. I know that you're someone who goes into a lot of these communities and makes a lot of these arguments to people who are weighing these heavy options on their minds, people who aren't part of this vast pro-abortion lobby. What do you tell them? How do you use your story to reach out to them?
I love to tell my personal story, and my story is that my mother walked out of her abortion appointment in Hartford, Connecticut at Mount Sinai Hospital. It was because a janitor talked to her when she was in the hallway in a hospital robe about to have an abortion, and she told her God would give her the strength to have me. The abortion doctor, he told her that she'd already paid for the procedure and she needed to stay, but she ran out and saved my life. And I love to tell my story because it really puts a personal face to the issue of abortion, because oftentimes with abortion, people are trying to devalue and dehumanize the unborn. And I like to tell my story so people can connect with the reality that I am a human being and I was in the womb as well.
Mm-hmm. Gloria, you talked about the way that the abortion industry tries to manipulate the way people think about this. From their perspective, they would rather that voices like yours simply not exist.
Yeah, they would, and too bad for them. I do, and I'm loud about it, and I encourage people. Look, what we're proposing to people is a way to love themselves, to love their children, to have bonds between the father and the mother and the baby. Abortion puts forward, actually, that there's something inherently defective about women because we can become pregnant and have children. And I reject that argument. There's nothing wrong with women. In fact, I support a woman's right to be born. And I think the more that we challenge a lot of the premises that abortion puts forward about women, I think the more that we'll see that abortion itself is very anti-woman, and it forecloses any real authentic discussion on authentic women's rights? How do we have an economy that is inclusive of women who are pregnant and mothering? How do we build businesses, education, a culture that welcomes women in all these stages of our lives, rather than foreclosing the conversation by saying, hey, you have abortion, that's your solution, that's your means to poverty, that's your means to wealth, that's your means to real justice. And it's just simply not true. Abortion teaches men that violence against women and their unborn children is okay, and that is precisely against what we as women want for how we should be treated and how men should be taught to treat us.
Gloria and Christina, I just want to thank you both for the work that you have done. We would not be at this point culturally without voices like yours. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Ben.
You're welcome.
Coming up on Fox News Primetime, former NFL star Benjamin Watson stands up for the unborn and examines the divided hearts of America in his new documentary. Don't go anywhere. The pro-life movement has gained allies and advocates from all walks of life, from politicians to everyday Americans to even famed football stars. You may know Benjamin Watson as a Super Bowl champion for the Patriots, but lately he's been tackling something much bigger. Streaming now on Fox Nation is Watson's documentary, Divided Hearts of America, where he uncovers the truth behind abortion. Here's a clip.
We're the first country in the history of the world that's founded on a vision of the human person. And that vision is that every human being has an incomparable dignity, beauty, and worth. But from the beginning, we've had denials. You reach in the 14th Amendment to deny the dignity of the child in the womb.
You find a lot of pro-abortion people always talking about it. They don't want to personify it. And I think once we can personify it, it makes a big difference.
Joining me now, co-producer of the film, Benjamin Watson. Thank you for joining me this evening. Why has this issue been so important in your life and in your effort that you wanted to make this documentary?
Well, it's really important because I am what some people will call pro-justice. And for me, justice protects the vulnerable. It protects people that need protection. It protects those who are unable to protect themselves. And so when I think about the preborn child, I can think of no other people group that needs such protection as well as their mothers. And the whole purpose of the documentary was, look, abortion is something that runs very, very deep. Nothing other than probably race brings as much emotional response. But within the debate, I wanted to promote some sense of empathy, some sense of understanding of the humanity of people on different sides of this issue.
You know, I think that that's something so critical about this, because the forces that are involved in trying to maintain the current abortion regime are so interested in keeping that divide going and keeping us from being able to talk to each other as human beings. They only want the mob and mass on either side. They only want to demonize. What were some of the things that you learned in talking to the different people that you did? Anything that really surprised you that you came across as you were making this documentary?
Well, I talked to about 30 different people from different walks of life. I talked to politicians. I talked to people in faith. I talked to people that were in medicine, even people who had survived abortions. I even spoke with the woman who actually engineered the Reproductive Health Act in New York. And what I realized was that so many people think that they are doing the right thing. It's not that the people on the other side hate others. They just may be misguided. What I really found also was that 75% of women would prefer to parent if their circumstances were different. And some of the work I do with an organization called Human Coalition addresses those issues through direct service, but also through advocacy. And so as I was traveling around America interviewing people who had abortions, the number one thing they said was, you know what, I would love to parent, but whether it was relational, whether it was housing, whether it was employment, whatever it was, those issues needed to be addressed. So as a community of people who want to protect life and serve women, our question is, how are we going to enter into those walks of life? How are we going to provide those services? Not point the finger. How are we going to provide services and wrap around to protect women, but also to support their preborn children?
And that degradation obviously has come as community groups, as church groups and the like have continuously declined in America over the past several decades. Government has stepped in some ways to try to make up the difference. But there really are people out there making that decision because of that lack of need. What kind of effort, what kind of things do you say to people to try to communicate that has to be addressed?
Well, life is the number one issue that we are dealing with. We're all image bearers of our Creator. And so life is important. And so what I would say to people is don't think that your acts are too small. Don't think that you can't make a difference, whether it is your church, whether it is making policy, whether it is serving a woman, whether it is adopting a child. We all have a role to play. We all have a job to do. Don't think that what you're doing is too little. But we also need both service as well as advocacy at the state, local, and federal level.
Thank you, Benjamin, for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you for watching Fox News Primetime this week. Don't forget to catch the Ben Domenech podcast on foxnewspodcast.com. I want to thank you in particular for tuning into Fox, for giving me the opportunity to do a show that I can't think would ever be allowed on any other network. It's a fitting thing to happen in the 25th anniversary. Jesse Waters will be hosting Fox News Primetime all next week, and Tucker Carlson is up next. Until next time, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray. Please clap.